Hey everybody, it's Travis speaking. Today I want to go over some of the techniques involved in using Revit as a conceptual modeling tool. So what I'm going to do to start off with is show you the two different ways that you can do this. You can do it one way, which is by opening a Conceptual Mass RFT. So you'll notice I click on the new icon here and just go to Conceptual Mass, and there's a template in here that we can use. One of the ways that you'll know that you're in a conceptual modeling template right off the bat is it opens up in this 3D view that has like a grayish white gradient background. So this is a family that we load into a project. And then the other way is if we come over here and we create a new project, you can create masses in place. So an in-place mass is essentially a mass that you're going to use in one project only. So if I go to massing and site, you'll notice that we have place mass, which goes back to the mass families that we were just taking a look at. Or we can say in-place mass, which is going to ask me to name it, and then we go about creating the mass. So if I call this sample in place and hit OK, we'll see our ribbon changes to the mass editor, which will allow us to start creating an in-place mass. So I'm going to leave this be for the time being. I'm just going to actually say cancel mass and leave this project open for the time being, and then I'm going to switch back over to the family 1 3D view that we started. So the first thing that you might want to do is set up a mass framework or a parametric framework that you can start to commit parameters to. And these will help you define the shape, the size, any of the dimensions that you might need in your project. And so we'll do this with instance parameters first. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my level 1 and I'm going to start drawing in some reference planes. So I go up here to reference plane under the create tab or type RP, and I'm just going to draw in 4 reference planes on either side of these origin planes that we already have in here. And you'll notice that I'm not connecting these. I don't want these points to come to the same spot like this. The reason being is if I grab one of these points to extend this, I don't want to have to tab cycle to get one specific reference plane. So I leave these disconnected, and if you like, what you can do is click on here where it says click to name, or come over here where it says name as well. So just going over these origin planes a little bit, if I click on this one, you'll see that this one's already named center, front, back. Okay, so I can assume that this one here is going to be my back plane. I'm just going to go to the 3D view just to make sure. Okay, so you can see that I've got this one that I've just drawn. It's my unnamed. And then if I use the view cube, you can see that the one here at the bottom would represent the front. Okay, so if this one's center, back, front, I'm going to name this one back, and then I'm going to come to this one and name this one front. Same as these two, I'll call this one left, and I'll call this one here right. So now I have named planes, and when I go to set a reference plane to draw something on, you can see that under placement plane, I'll have those named planes now that I can pick from my pick list. So that's something there that's kind of handy. You don't have to name these planes, but if you don't name them, then you're going to have to pick them from the options when you go to set your reference plane. Okay, so the next thing that I would do is I would set up some dimension constraints that will allow me to create geometry and lock the faces of the geometry to these reference planes. So if I go back to my level 1 view here, you can see my dimension tool becomes active. And if I click on that, what I'm going to do is put a dimension that goes all the way across, and I'm going to hit my EQ toggle. So what that does is lets me make sure that any dimension that I input for my parameter, for this guy right here, it's going to be equal on both sides. So now that I have that parameter in there, that dimension in there, you'll notice that when I select it, I get my options to create a parameter up here. In 2016 and any Revit further back, this label would have appeared down here in the options bar. So this is something new here in 2017, is it's gone into the extended ribbon. So to create that parameter, what I'm going to do is click on this button right here, and then you'll notice it brings up a dialog box. So because I'm going to this from a dimension itself in the model space, you can see that the discipline, type of parameter, and the group is all kind of set up here already for me. So I'm just going to call this one mass width, and I'm going to change that to an instance parameter and hit OK. So now you can see I've got mass width at 208, and then I'm going to do the same thing over here, a string, hit the EQ toggle, and then I'm going to do a full dimension that goes all the way. Okay, so you won't be able to create these parameters. If we grab these guys here, I don't want to create parameters for the string. I want to create the parameter for the full dimension. So now I'm going to go in here and type in mass length, change that to instance. Okay, so now I have my parametric framework set up for the horizontal dimensions, but to get a height parameter in here, the next thing I'm going to do is go to any elevation view and just hit, just double click on those. So you can see I've got my length parameter in here, but now what I want to do is draw another reference plane that's going to go across the top. So I'll just draw that in. And we could name this one, we could call this top, or mass top, I guess. And I'll leave it at that. And I'm going to do the same thing here, hit the dimension. I don't need an equality dimension in here, I just need the one dimension. So back here, we'll call this mass height. Okay, so we'll change that to an instance and we'll hit OK. So now we can start creating the geometry, but before I do that, what I want to do is flex my framework and make sure that these things are working. Okay, so I'm going to go into the 3D view here and just change that to an isometric view so that I can see these. And you'll notice that the planes that I've created, these user planes, they're up here at the top, but when you hover over them, you can see a representation of that plane. Okay, now when you select these, you can expand them. You can make them a little bit longer if you need to, but I'm just going to leave them as is for the time being. And I probably don't want to see these dimensions in this view. I'm just going to want to see my reference geometry and the actual geometry that I create. So what I'm going to do is hit VV to control my visibility, and I'm going to move over here to Annotation Categories and just uncheck dimensions. And this way, when I'm working in 3D, I'm just looking at geometry and not the actual parameters. I'm going to worry about my parameters in the orthographic views. Okay, so I'll get started here in the level 1 view. And what I'm going to do now is click on my model category. Okay, so when I check model category, what I'm going to be creating are model lines. And you can see that the placement plane is set to level 1. So that's going to be where the bottom of this mass exists. So I'm just going to click on the rectangle tool here so I can get these all done at once. And I'm going to go to where these planes intersect. Okay, so I can see that it snaps to that one, and then I'm going to come down to this one. And by using a rectangle tool and drawing that in, I get all 4 lock constraints at once. So now I can click these 1, 2, 3, 4. And essentially, I have enough now to create this mass. Okay, so I could do more. I could create another shape at the top. So why don't I do that? Actually, we could simply go to 3D now and select these model lines and say create form. Right, now I just get a simple extrusion. Or alternatively, I can go back here to model, click on PICC Lines, and instead of choosing reference plane level 1, I'm going to use the reference plane top that I've created and named. So now if I click on any of these lines, you can see I get a temporary dashed blue line to tell me where it's going to be. So just to make this a little more interesting, I'm going to put in an offset of, let's say, 7 feet. Okay, so I'm clicking over these guys, and just to make sure I'm getting the right side of this line, I'm going to use an orthographic view in the 3D view, just so that I know where I'm clicking these to. Okay, now that I've got those lines in place, I'll switch back to an ISO, and you can see I've got these two rectangles, and I'm just going to hit escape, and you'll notice there's a slight difference here in the conceptual modeling editor, is that when I select a group of lines, just one of them, I get the entire chain. So I'm going to grab this one, hold down Control, and select this one. And now if I click on Create Form and choose Solid Form, I'm going to get that tapered form that I've got. Okay, so I know that this top is set to, it's the top of my form, but it should be align locked to, let's just go to an elevation. It should be align locked to this. So if I use this show constraints, it's not. I can tell that I've got a burgundy line here that's align locked in the bottom. So what I'm going to do is hit AL, or use the align tool from Modify Tools, and just select that reference plane, and then I'm going to hover over here, and you can see that when I hover over the face, the top face of my mass, it's telling me that it's a form element and it's a surface. So I know that I'm getting the right geometry. So I'll click on that and hit the lock, and then go back to my 3D view, and I'll test out my framework again. Okay, so I'm going to go back up to this button right here to flex out my parameters. Okay, you can see that this button's called Family Types, and it brings up a dialog box that's got the parameters that I've created. So I've got height, length, and width in here. So I'm going to make my width 80 feet, and I'm going to make the length 120. And then for the height, let's make that 56. Okay, so you'll notice that I didn't enter any feet symbols there. I just typed in the number. If I did need to get an inches, maybe I would go back in here and I would type in 56 foot 6, and then I don't need to worry about the inches sign because I've put the foot in. But if I needed 6.5, then I would put a space and a half my inches. Now we'll hit apply on this, and we can see we've got some pretty strange geometry here. So let me just hit OK, and I'm gonna move in here and see what's going on with this. So the reason why I'm getting a tapered form here, something that we didn't quite expect, is because of these edges. These faces didn't get align locked to the planes, only the edges that we created them from. Okay, so if I need those faces instead, and I don't want a tapered form, I'm going to go back and just take care of this. Well, actually, I'm not going to undo it. There's another feature that we can use to basically deconstruct this mass. So you'll notice that right now I'm hovering over any of these faces or these edges. I can select them, right? So if I grab this, I get a gimbal that I can stretch this out, or I can go to a specific point and make that change as well with the gimbal. And these aren't exclusive to just moving with the gimbal. We can grab these sub elements, and we can use modification tools like rotate on them. So if we put that in, you can see that's skewed this whole form. Okay, so now I'll go back, just flatten this out a little bit. And what I'm going to do is hit tab, and what that does is it selects the entire form. And when I get the entire form, you see my ribbon extends as well, and there's a host of other tools that I can use, like adding an edge. Okay, so if I add an edge, basically it's going to well, put another line segment in there for me. Okay, and to add that edge, more or less all I'm doing is just putting my cursor on one of these boundary lines. Okay, and then from there you can select these and start creating more complex forms. Okay, so again, let's go back to that regular shape. I'll grab the entire mass again, and then we've got this other one called Add Profile. So if I need another horizontal plane, then I'm basically just hovering over the surface and placing it where I need it to be. And then by going in and grabbing these, we can grab that line and then move it up. Or we can grab an individual line segment and move that out, okay, which will give me that nice curve. Okay, so I don't want any curves in this right now. I just want something like a simple box just to start laying out some schematic design. So I'm going to grab the entire form here and just hit dissolve. And what dissolve will do is turn this back into the 4 profiles that ended up being that loft. So this one I'm going to remove. This one I'm going to remove as well. And I'm just going to grab this guy and hit create form and get that box again. Okay, so if I switch back to an orthographic view, we can see I've got my top reference plane. I'll hit align again and get that locked up. And then in the isometric view, I'm just going to switch that back, and I've got these other reference planes that I need to get attached to these faces. Okay, so I'm going to hit align again and then grab a reference and then hit the face. And you can see this dashed blue line comes across to say, hey, you've just aligned this face to that reference plane, but I need to lock it so that my parameters actually work for me. So I'm going to do that 3 more times. Grab this one and this one, lock it. Grab this one and this one, lock it. And then this one and this one and lock it. Okay, so that should be all we need to do to get this fully flexible with the parametrics. So I'll move that over here and open up that family types dialog again. And now you can see I'm going to switch these back. So 56 feet, the length I want it to be 120, and the width I want it to be 80. So if I hit apply, you can see that my entire cube or my rectangle here has decreased with those sizes that I put in. So there's one more thing before we get out of here. You might want to create a material to help you with your schematics so that you can name it according to a usage or a space type. So another thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to my family types dialog again, and I'm going to create a new parameter from here for the material. So I'm going to call this one usage material, or mass usage, maybe we should be specific. Okay, and this one here, again, we're going to make this an instance because when we place this into the project, I might have multiple masses and I'm going to want to use them for different things. So you can see here this time by creating the parameter from this dialog box, these aren't grayed out. So that said, I'm going to leave the discipline as common, but the type of parameter, I don't want this to be length. I want this to be a material. So by changing that to material, it moves the group parameter under materials and finish, and I'm fine with that. So I'm going to hit OK. And now you can see I've got a mass usage material, okay, which is set to by category. So that's okay. I'll hit OK on that for now. And what I want to do is grab either the entire mass form or maybe one specific face. So right now, if I select just that one specific face, you can see there's instance parameters for that sub-element, which I can change. Or coming back in here and hitting tab, I can grab the entire mass and then assign this category through the instance parameters for the entire solid. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is click on this button right here that says associate family parameter. We could enter this parameter in here, but I don't want to do that. I want to be able to associate it so that in the project I can change these materials for every single form that I put in here. So I click on this button and you can see that material parameter that I created is sitting right here. So I hit OK. And I think we're pretty much ready to go, except maybe we want to show one more thing before we get out of here. If you go back, let me just put in another rectangle, and I'm going to set my reference plane to be the top here this time. So whatever I draw now is going to be on that plane, which is essentially the top plane, but what I'm drawing is going to be relative to the top of the form, not the reference plane it's attached to. So I'm going to put in another rectangle here. I'm just going to use the PICC Lines option again, and I'm going to make this one, let's make it 20 feet. Okay, and using that PICC Lines option, I'm going to come in here and put 4 more lines in. So now when I grab these line segments, okay, let me just get out of that PICC Lines option. I'm going to say create form, but this time I'm going to use the void form. And you can see these lines, maybe you can't see, it's very faint, but these are orange. So when I select this form, or I don't really have to select it, I just actually have to let it finish what it's doing. You can see it's removed that geometry. Okay, so by selecting the bottom of that geometry, I can use this Z axis and push it all the way down. It should snap into place, and you can see it's giving me an align lock there. Okay, so that said, we could put 4 more reference planes in here, call those atrium void or whatever you want really. I'm not going to leave that in there. I just wanted to let you see how easy it is to put the void geometry in here and start carving out from this initial mass. So I'm going to hit the tab again a couple times and then just grab that void mass and hit delete. I don't want to actually have that space in there for the time being. Okay, so now that that's done, I'm going to hit the big R at the top, say save as family, and I'm just going to save this to my desktop as Conceptual Mass Schematic, and hit save. The man himself, Bill, has just signed in. I'm just going to load this into the project now. I'm going to leave it open, so I'm not going to hit this one. I might need to make edits to this, so I'm just going to hit load into the project. And what happens now is you can see that I've got this square, and it's just asking me, okay, well, where do you want to place this? So I'm going to put one here, and I'll put one over here. So now I got 2 instances of this one mass family. So if I select this one, you can see my instance parameters now are right there. So we can go in, define a material for this, and change up my parameters. So on this one, I'm going to change the height on this one to 40 feet, the length on this one to 90, and the width, I'll leave that one, we'll make that 60. Okay, so now you can see I've got some different size here. Now, alternatively, what we can do, because we created those reference planes, we can stretch these out. Okay, we can just use dynamic grips to change these dimensions, and you can see it's changing these to very arbitrary dimensions for the length and width. And the same thing goes for our height, but when I flip over to a 3D view, notice how I don't have those grips. Okay, so unfortunately I can't do this unless I make some changes to these reference plane types. So if I go back to the elevation here, let's see, we can grab this one. Again, I can change the length, but where's the grip for the height? Okay, so I'm going to slip back over here to that mass family, and I'm going to select these reference planes that you see here. They're saying that these are weak reference planes. So all the user created reference planes that I've got in here, so that would be this one, this one, this one, and this one. And then there's a top in there as well, which I think is this guy here. So grabbing all 5 of those reference planes, I'm going to change this where it says is reference from weak to strong. Okay, so now I'll save that change, and then when I load this back into my project, we're going to get this message. Now 9 times out of 10 you're going to want to select the second one, override the existing version and its parameter values. Okay, so I'll click on that, and now you can see I've got again those dynamic grips. And let's see, if we go back to north, we don't have dynamic grips. Okay, I think I remember that actually happening before, but these ones I guess you still have to use the height parameter. Let's see if that holds true over here in this one. Okay, so basically the point that I'm getting at is, depending on what type of reference you have, these will behave a little bit differently. So what I would want to do maybe is have my align tool available so that I can align this face here to this face. So if I select that as my reference and I grab that face, notice what's happened here is that it moved the entire shape. Okay, so a weak reference I don't believe is going to do that. So let's take a quick look at that now. I'm going to go just break that, bring it back over here, and go back into the Conceptual Mass. And again, all my user created reference planes, well, these ones here, I'm going to change these back from strong to week. Okay, and then we'll save that. I'm going to load this back in, and now let's take a look at what happens with this. So if I move that a little bit closer and I align those faces again, okay, you'll notice that it's not staying that height, or sorry, that width or length. It's moving the entire object. Okay, so what I might want it to do is actually extend that. I can drag that grip over, but there is a way to get that to modify this actual dimension. Okay, and so to do that, we need to make those reference planes strong references. So just an additional little feature as far as the mass framework goes. You can see that there are a number of other types in here. So we've got weak, we've got strong, and then there's actually named references as well, like left, right, front, the ones that we've created here, and then center, front, back, and then center elevation. So essentially, let's see, if I select these, that was left. Let's try, we'll make this left, we'll make this the right reference, we'll make this the front, no, sorry, that's the back. This is the front, and then we'll switch over here to an elevation, and we'll call this one top. Okay, so save that, load this back in. So to illustrate this, the reason why I wanted to show you this was because when we're looking at, say, a wall in a project, and we create a family, say we put a door or a window in that wall. When we hover over and we want to align things to these elements, you'll see these sometimes. Like that's my center, that's my origin reference plane. Or if I come over here, right, you can see that that's called reference R2, right? And we can tab around these things. Right now, if I hover over that one, that's saying the wall. Okay, but that one is for the void, essentially created in that window family. Okay, so there's a lot of reference planes in any family essentially, but if you name them, they'll have a little bit more specific behavior. Okay, so that was just something I wanted to show you regarding these other families. Oh. Okay, so you'll notice if you missed that, this time when I hit the align and I change where this line is, watch what happens with this line. So I grab my reference, select this one. This one stays the same, and now essentially my instance parameters have changed to suit my modify tool. So if I hit align and move that over, okay, so just some different behaviors that you'll see using these different reference types. And then of course, if we switch this back over to 3D, we can grab either of these masses and then go into the mass usage material, and we can create that material that we're going to use. So if this one is going to be, let's say that this is going to be office space. Okay, I'm gonna go in here, create a new material. I'll rename this and call it schematic and office. Okay, and then for that material, I'm gonna give it a color. So we'll go into graphics, change the color on this to be like a nice orange color, and then I want to have that same RGB value for my surface, for my cut color as well. So I'll just change all of these. These are for patterns. Okay, so the pattern, if you place a pattern on the front of this, like a brick hatch or whatever, that's going to be the line for that pattern. And cut patterns and surface patterns are slightly different. The surface pattern shouldn't scale when you change the scale of your view, whereas a cut pattern is more of it's drafting and it should scale. So if it's concrete, then it should be more dense at a detail scale rather than at say 1 to 100 or 1/8 of an inch to a foot. Okay, so these should be fine. I don't really actually need to change these. And if you did want, you could put a render appearance in here. So this is 208, 116, 32. So in here, I'm going to type in 208, 116, 32. Okay, now I've got that same value, and when I hit OK, right, we can see that I've got that material on there, but I'm still not seeing the color, and that's simply because of the shade mode I have on here. So if I switch that over, you can see now that it's solid, whereas the default material for masses by category is like a transparent. They're kind of they're not fully opaque like this one here. Okay, so we'll come back to this in another video. I want to keep going with this in a second part, and we're going to explore in a little bit further detail some of these other tools and how we create some more complex forms using the InPlace massing tool. So stay tuned, and we'll get back to that in just a moment. Thanks for watching. Bye now.